Daria, can you hear us? Oh, we're sorry. We had some technical issues here. Welcome again, everyone. I'll start again so Daria can hear everything. Welcome everyone to the Oxford Internet Policy and Politics Hybrid Conference today. We have Daria Gritsenko talking about algorithm regulation and governance. She is from the University of Helsinki. She's an assistant professor in Russian and Eurasian studies, where she uses her background in political science and expertise in digital humanities to explore the transformation of political governance in response to the changing natural and technological environments. For those who are online, just to let you know, we have a Google app, and we will also be reading the questions on the Zoom meeting at the end. Thank you very much. I leave the floor to Daria.
Hello, can you hear me well?
We can hear you.
No? Okay.
I think.
Now?
Yes, now we can hear you. Thank you. So
fantastic.
sorry, Reverend.
Fantastic. Yeah, a little bit of trouble as usual, but nonetheless, it's a pleasure and an honor to be at least virtually here today again. I already participated in the Oxford Internet Policy and Politics Conference before, and it's great to be back, even if online, and hopefully the next time also in person. Let me share with you a couple of slides, and then we take it from there. So can you hear my can you see my presentation now?
Yes, we can see the presentation.
Okay, fantastic. So I formulated the topic for today a bit broadly: algorithmic governance, why should we care? And the talk that I will be giving now is based on already completed study and an ongoing study, and both of them I do in collaboration with my good friend and colleague Matt Wood from the University of Sheffield. So I'm going to start with some definitions and then outline a conceptual model that we have developed previously and show how we are attempting to empirically illustrate this model and provide a few concluding remarks with regard to why should we care about algorithmic governance. So what is algorithmic governance? It's quite a new term, and but already quite hyped term. So we need a bit of clarification here. There are several definitions that have been given by different scholars. I will start with the definition that was one of the earliest. Natasha Just and Michael Latze in 2017 published a paper about governance by and of algorithms, where they make this distinction. What does it mean to govern an algorithm versus be governed by an algorithm? And they make a case that algorithmic governance is a sort of governance by software. 2019, Katzenbach and Lena Utrecht, they, in my opinion, open up this early definition. They specify what is meant by governance, and they specify what is meant by software. So they say that algorithmic governance is a form of social ordering that relies on coordination between actors. So this is their definition of governance, and is based on rules and incorporates particularly complex computer-based epistemic procedures. This is where kind of they're zooming out of software and showing the broad spectrum of what it could be that is the governing agent. Right, so who is the principal in algorithmic governance? And I must warn you that when I'm going to be talking about algorithmic governance, I'm using a definition that is somewhat narrower than these ones. So by algorithmic governance, I will mainly be referring to a process by which governments use data-driven technologies and algorithmic systems to automate decision-making and deliver public services. So I really bring it to the realm of public policy and governance. Because if we talk about governance by software, we may be talking about a lot of different things. But I think what interests us here, and also in the realm of policy studies, is how governments do it and how public policies are increasingly being algorithmatized, if there is such a word. So in our previous work, Matt and I, we have made 2 claims. Our first claim was that algorithmic governance is an emerging mode of governance, which is distinct from and with an equal status alongside hierarchy, market, and network governance. So we make a reference to the very popular modes of governance typology, modes of governance approach, where we say there are hierarchies, markets, and networks as kind of ideal types of how we could approach governance. And we say algorithmic governance does it differently. Why is it differently? Because we kind of create a conceptual scheme that allows us to disentangle what are the similarities and differences between hierarchies, markets, and networks, and show how algorithmic governance fits into this conceptual framework. So, as any other governance, algorithmic governance is concerned with coordinating relations between actors, but it does it via some kind of digital mechanisms, and it relies on a distinct combination of coordinating logic, by which we mean an interplay between individual and collective behavior, and social ordering, by which we are referring to rules and norms. Now, this sounds very abstract. That is why here I bring you a table that explains it a bit better. So how do we situate algorithmic governance conceptually? So with regard to rules and norms, we kind of imagine that some rules and norms can be either ex ante or ex post. So they are either we first define the rules and then we strictly apply them to any behavior that we observe, or rules and norms are kind of emerging from behaviors and are modified along the way. It's a more adaptive approach to rules and norms. And if we think about networks, or if we think about markets, then we understand that this is where we have this ex post. It means it's a more adaptive framework for rules and norms, whereas if we think about hierarchy, it's a much more rigid approach. We first write the status, we first say this is what is allowed and this is what is prohibited, and after that, whatever behavior there is, we look back into our framework and say, is it prohibited or is it allowed? And in a way, algorithms do it in a very similar manner, because you first have to write a program and specify the parameters, and only after that it can be rolled out and applied. And obviously here you may be thinking about machine learning and saying, wait, this algorithm, they actually learn, and this is true. But if we are very pedantic, then we also have to say, well, it is also defined ex ante that these algorithms are supposed to learn from the new input data. So this kind of brings them back into this realm of it is also a choice in advance. Are you going to have a self-learning system or not? And then with regard to the coordinating logic, broadly speaking, logics can be either actor-oriented or environment-oriented. And the logic of, again, law is very actor-oriented, very personalized, whereas the logic of the market is much more environmental, is much more about creating this space in which then we hope certain patterns will unfold. And in a very similar manner, we see the functioning of algorithmic systems. So in this regard, we are very much in line with previous claims that have been made, for example, by Young, that algorithmic governance and algorithmic regulation is kind of a special case of governance by design. So what do we mean by this? What is governance by design? And in order to understand it, it may be easier again to compare to other forms of governance. So if we ask, how do we govern by law? The leading question is what is prohibited and what is not prohibited. This is the leading question that we ask when we are trying to understand how law governs. If we want to ask how markets govern, then the question is the leading question, what is efficient or cost efficient? The governance by networks is based on the question of norms, what is allowed. It's not necessarily prohibited, but it may be not seen well. It's not socially acceptable. And governance by design is led by a question, what is possible? So here design becomes a regulator for human behavior. It goes a long way, this whole tradition of thinking about design as a system of affordances. If you have a chair, it affords you sitting. It also affords you standing on it and exchanging a light bulb. It affords sleeping in a fairly poor manner, and it doesn't really afford you transportation. It's very difficult to transport yourself with a chair, right? So unless it has some rollers on it. So in this way, each and every environment affords something and constrains some other behaviors. And design-based regulation operates exactly like this, by preventing or inhibiting conduct or social outcomes. And this is what essentially we believe algorithmic governance is trying to do. So now you're very well prepared to look at this picture and tell me, what does a car sharing or ride sharing app and a speed bump have in common? Well, exactly that they are both examples of governance by design. A speed bump is not prohibiting you to drive 100 kilometers per hour. It's not creating some kind of an incentive structure in this regard. It just tells you that it creates a certain environment. And in this environment, you realize that if you are driving very quickly, you may be damaging your own car, so you are preferring not to do that, right? So this is the classical, the starting idea of how design can be a regulator for human behavior. And in a very similar manner, let's say Uber and such applications, they also provide a certain environment in which we are acting in a certain way. And this way is how they expect us to act, to give ratings or to drive in a certain manner, to choose our routes in a certain way. It does have this prescriptive character, but this prescription comes from creating an environment, placing us within this environment. So what we so far have understood about the mechanics of algorithmic governance is that in our very clumsy language, it's an ex-ante environment-oriented governance at scale. So in simple terms, algorithmic governance creates regulatory environments. And these environments, they alter human behavior. So in this regard, algorithmic governance is contextual. And what it plays with is that what we know from cognitive psychology, minds and environments are acting always in tandem. So human beings have a fantastic evolutionary capacity to evolve and adapt. And we know also of such a phenomenon as reverse adaptation that has been described, for instance, by Langdon Winner in his Technology Out of Control book. So the idea that when a new technology appears, it actually may create new behaviors because we reversely adapt to technology. And in this regard, if we look broader at the zeitgeist in which we are finding ourselves, where there is a lot of push for innovation, and very often innovation for the sake of innovation and digitalization for the sake of digitalization. We are creating solutions to kind of problems that are not yet problems, but they become problems once the solutions are there. So we reversely adapt ourselves to them. This is a fairly important point for our later discussion, but also we need to take another point, and that is that algorithmic governance increasingly interacts with other governance modes as we use more and more digital tools across a spectrum of tasks. And this is what Matt and I have been looking at in our paper that we published in 2020 in Regulation and Governance. That was called Algorithmic Governance and Modes of Governance Approach. Basically, what we are doing there is to take 3 what we call exemplary cases of market hierarchy and network-based governance, and inspect what happens to them when they uptake digital technologies, when they start relying more and more on algorithms. And what we are showing in that paper, that what we observe is some kind of a shift. So certain norms and certain patterns shift towards what we call algorithmic governance, towards this environment-oriented, accent design-based governance at scale. It's not fully and completely there, but we can see the trend. We can see how different forms of governance share more and more similarities once they are increasingly relying on algorithms. And we think this is an important property to remember, because it means that in a way our different forms of governance become more alike. But is it a problem, and why should we care about it? Well, there are at least 2 reasons for us to care. One refers to the current state of affairs, and this is what I was talking about just a moment ago. Algorithmic governance remains largely proprietary or based on proprietary algorithms, and the one who defines the algorithm also defines the outcomes. And this is something that is not inevitable. It can be changed, but this is quite an important debate that we are having right now, and we should be having in the realm of public governance. So when public authorities rely on privately developed algorithmic systems, what does it actually mean, and how these types of processes can be rendered democratic? This is one big chunk of conversations that we are having and should continue having. And in a way, there is a pragmatic solution to this. So we should have algorithms that are developed by governments for public needs. This seems to be quite a straightforward solution, but it's not necessarily such an easy solution, or it's not easy to implement because, well, as we all know, governments are lacking funds. They want to increase efficiency because they want to save money in the age of austerity, and, well, we know all this narrative. Then there is another point to be made. Now, it does so. Even if we imagine that we don't have these proprietary algorithms used by governments, used by public sector, let's imagine public sector is now fully developing its own algorithmic systems. It still doesn't solve the second problem, and this is the problem of public scrutiny. And what does it mean for the public to scrutinize algorithmic governance? So scholars have been acutely aware of such properties of algorithmic systems as opacity, biases, lacking accountability, and risks to privacy. And there is a fair deal of scholarly work on these topics. But what I find fascinating is that in the latest surveys that scholars are making with ordinary citizens, they show that ordinary citizens have exactly the same concerns. So it's not just a scholarly discussion somewhere up in the air. It is real. These are real concerns of real people. And if it is so, then algorithmic governance actually compromises legitimacy of democratic governance, not only in theory, but increasingly in practice. And this is the topic of our ongoing project. So in our ongoing project, we are interested in the perceptions of legitimacy when it comes to algorithmic governance, but also in a more practical question of how algorithmic governance can be made more legitimate. And if we take the current understanding and theories of legitimacy as a starting point, what we would find that we tend to distinguish between input, throughput, and output legitimacy, and that potentially the problems with algorithmic governance would be situated around the input and throughput legitimacy. So procedural legitimacy specifically, if we're talking about opacity and privacy risks and accountability, these are the things that pertain to this procedural or throughput legitimacy, which would mean that if we can somehow improve these features of algorithmic governance, we should be able to improve its legitimacy. And we are currently running some little like scenario-based or vignette-based experiments where we are putting people in some fictional situations where they are encountering algorithmic authority, and we are experimenting with the level of information they are getting, with a kind of quality of information, with their capacity to influence this information. And so far we are finding something that I find really fascinating, and that is that improved information does improve satisfaction with procedures. So certain aspects of legitimacy with disentangle this quite complex context, but not the others. And one thing that people continuously do not see or do not accept is that algorithmic governance is really the best way of implementing certain public policies. So if we ask them, how is the interaction with an app X, and are you satisfied with the decision, and do you think it's fair and trustworthy, they may still be saying, well, yes, well, it's not bad. But if you ask them, is this, in your opinion, how these things should be done? Is this how we should govern? You will very quickly, from those people who were just a second ago satisfied with the outcome, get an answer no. And this, of course, brings us back to the very simple truth that we only know what we ask. So we should probably broaden a bit our imagination with regard to which questions we ask, so to understand how algorithmic governance is really seen by ordinary citizens. But it's not only our finding. There is an emerging scholarship, I would say, in the past 3 years. Increasingly, people all over the world, not only in Europe, but also in the US and also in Japan and in Korea, have been doing experiments, trying to understand how people perceive algorithmic governance. And what they find continuously is that humans in the loop, so the fact that there is some kind of a human somewhere, or people believe that it is like this, that the process is not 100% and fully automated, continuously have highest legitimacy ratings. So ensuring that humans are still in the loop seems at the moment to be the key to maintaining legitimacy of governance. Now, obviously, the next question comes, why do humans in the loop have this effect? Because we know exactly that humans we talked for 30 years about problems of human factor and how humans are also biased and noisy and unreliable. And now we are arriving at a stage where we can make fantastic decisions at a scale, harness big data, make it remove noise, and citizens still would prefer to have noisy bureaucrats there. This is something that needs to be further researched, but I guess, and this is really just an educated guess, has something to do with relatability of power. So, very basic things about we want to be governed by those who can relate to our concerns, who can potentially hear us, and who can understand what it is to be human, who can relate to the human condition. And this is something we are not getting from automation and algorithms. But again, this is now just a speculative part of my talk. I have not empirically studied this. So this brings me to my last point, and that is that by now we understand what are the problems with algorithmic governance, and there are a few, and the fact that whenever we implement algorithmic systems in other modes of governance, they kind of shift towards being more and more like algorithmic governance, basically provides us with a bit of a scary perspective that our governance is becoming, if not algorithmic, but algorithmic-like. And this, according to our current knowledge, will necessarily reduce legitimacy of governance. And we already have a legitimacy crisis going on in Europe, and we cannot afford even more deteriorated legitimacy of governance, especially as long as we want to give solid responses to the grand challenges of today. So that is why there is now a lot of thinking around how can we improve legitimacy of algorithmic governance and what should be our avenues of doing that. And here I provided a whole range of ideas that the scholars in the last, let's say, 3-5 years have been putting forward. So how can we regulate algorithms, and regulating AI, for instance, is right now a really big topic, right? What is the role of ethics? What is the role of rights to explanation, justifications, participation? Can we use some kind of impact assessment like we do environmental impact assessment? What is the role of empathy? What I personally would like to bring to the table is a discussion on should there be a right to opt out of algorithmic governance. So what would it take to actually have a possibility to keep humans in the loop? And if our future projection would be not complete automation, but a kind of a more sound interaction between humans and machines, what it would actually mean in the field of public governance, and which choices should then be made today so that we are getting to an algorithmic governance that on the one hand does yield the benefits, so the cost efficiency and the individualization and other, without doubt, positive effects that algorithmic systems can bring to public governance, but without deteriorating its legitimacy. This is a discussion point with which I would like to conclude my today's presentation. And I would like to thank you for coming here, and I'm absolutely excited to hear your ideas, comments, and questions.
Thank you very much, Daria. So we'll be receiving questions online, but also we want to open if there's any questions here for Daria today. Okay, so we're not receiving any questions online too. We want to thank Daria and everyone for joining us. Unfortunately, Lucas is not going to be able to be here for the rest of the talk. So we would end right now. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Daria, again. And hope to see you on the rest of the sessions we're going to have today.
Thank you.